Hello! We should be coming live any second now, making sure YouTube is paying attention. It is paying attention. So, we are going to be reading through Philosophical Investigations by Ludwig Wittgenstein. It's one of arguably the most important work of philosophy ever written, some people would say. It has to do with language and how it works. We're going to be reading through it. This version is translated by G.E.M. Anscombe, who was a philosopher in her own right. Like I said, this has to do with how language works. Sometimes a complaint you hear about philosophy is that it's all semantics, and that's kind of unfair. But what is true is that a lot of philosophy gets all philosophy has to get filtered through language because language is how we express our thoughts. And language is one of those things that's so fundamental that if you don't spend time to think about what it is and how it works, you can kind of miss it, which means that we're using this tool to express thoughts and sort of share information with one another, but we don't know how it works. And so that implies that we might be missing some important things. And Wittgenstein goes over a lot of sort of background, a lot of fundamental stuff detailing how language is kind of constructed and how it works, and it's pretty remarkable. I've read through part of this. I haven't read the whole thing. It can get dense at times, but if we take it slow, I think we'll be able to get through it without too much trouble. Let's go ahead and hop right in. Now, the opening paragraph is in Latin, but no worries, it is helpfully translated for us. Let's go ahead and find this. Go to part 1. There we go. So it starts with a passage from Augustine's Confessions, which is helpfully translated in the footnote. So Augustine says, "When they, my elders, named some object and accordingly moved towards something, I saw this, and I grasped that the thing was called by the sound they uttered when they meant to point it out. Their intention was shown by their bodily movement, as it were the natural language of all peoples, the expression of the face, the play of the eyes, the movement of the other parts of the body, and the tone of voice which expresses our state of mind in seeking, having, rejecting, or avoiding something. Thus, as I heard words repeatedly used in their proper places in various sentences, I gradually learnt to understand what objects they signified, and after I had trained my mouth to form these signs, I used them to express my own desires." So that's Augustine giving his account of how language works, and now Wittgenstein is going to be responding to it. "These words, it seems to me, give us a particular picture of the essence of human language. It is this: the individual words in language name objects. Sentences are combinations of such names. In this picture of language we find the roots of the following idea. Every word has a meaning. This meaning is correlated with the word. It is the object for which the word stands." So Augustine's vision of language as one oriented around meaning and questioning like what a word means and what a word signifies specifically. Augustine does not speak of there being any difference between kinds of word. If you describe the language of learning in this way, you are, I believe, thinking primarily of nouns like table, chair, bread, and of people's names, and only secondarily of the names of certain actions and properties, and of the remaining kinds of word as something that will take care of itself. Now think of the following use of language. I send someone shopping. I give him a slip marked 5 red apples. He takes the slip to the shopkeeper, who opens the drawer marked apples. Then he looks up the word red in a table and finds a color sample opposite it. Then he says the series of cardinal numbers, I assume he knows them by heart, up to the word 5, and for each number he takes an apple of the same color out of the sample, and for each number he takes an apple of the same color as the sample out of the drawer. It is in this and similar ways that one operates with words. But how does he know where and how he is to look up the word red and what he is to do with the word 5? Well, I assume that he acts as I have described. Explanations come to an end somewhere. But what is the meaning of the word 5? No such thing was in question here, only how the word 5 is used. So Wittgenstein is getting here is, from a certain perspective, it doesn't matter what the word 5 means, it matters what the shopkeep does with the word. And if they count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out loud to themselves as they're picking apples out of the drawer, and that's how many apples you get, then what you needed to happen as a shopper worked. the usage of the word five did the trick. We don't have to ask what it means in this particular case. At least that's what I think. I should mention, I'm going to be giving my commentary on this, but Wittgenstein is very advanced, and I'm just me. So, follow up with actual experts on a lot of this stuff to make sure that I'm interpreting this correctly. But that's what I think that Wittgenstein is getting at here, personally. That philosophical concept of meaning has its place in a primitive idea of the way language functions. But one can also say that it is the idea of a language more primitive than ours. Let us imagine a language for which the description given by Augustine is right. The language is meant to serve for communication between builder A and an assistant B. A is building with building stones. There are blocks, pillars, slabs, and beams. B has to pass the stones, and that in the order in which A needs them. For this purpose, they use a language consisting of the words block, pillar, slab, beam. A calls them out. B brings the stone which he has learnt to bring at such and such a call. Conceive this as a complete primitive language. So conceive of a language that has literally only 4 words in it. Block, pillar, slab, and beam. And we're not even going to say that block indicates or means block, or pillar means pillar, or slab means like the slab means the shape of stone that is a slab, or beam means the piece of stone that is a beam. Rather, within the context of this language, we're purely focusing on the functional results of what happens. When A says block, he gets brought a particular shape of stone. Now, if you want to call that particular shape of stone a block, you're welcome to, but that's actually more advanced than we're looking at right now. At the moment, we're literally just saying A says block, and then he is brought a particular shape of stone. Augustine, we might say, does describe a system of communication, only not everything that we call language is this system, and one has to say this in many cases where the language arises. Is this an appropriate description or not? The answer is yes. Yes, it is appropriate, but only for this narrowly circumscribed region, not for the whole of what you are claiming to describe. It is as if someone were to say, a game consists in moving objects about on a surface according to certain rules, and we replied, you seem to be thinking of board games, but there are others. You could make your definition correct by expressly restricting it to those games. Imagine a script in which the letters were used to stand for sounds, and also as signs of emphasis and punctuation. A script can be conceived as a language for describing sound patterns. Now imagine someone interpreting the script as if it were simply a correspondence of letters to sound, and as if the letters had not also completely different functions. Augustine's conception of language is like such an oversimple conception of the script. If we look at the example in the first example over in paragraph 1, Augustine's example, that is. So if we looked at the example in paragraph 1, we may perhaps get an inkling how much this general notion of the meaning of a word surrounds the working of language with a haze which makes clear vision impossible. It disperses the fog to study the phenomena of language in primitive kinds of application in which one can command a clear view of the aim and functioning of the words. A child uses such primitive forms of language when it learns to talk. Here the teaching of language is not explanation, but training. We could imagine that the language of example 2 was a whole language of A and B. So, for example, so he's saying the language of block, pillar, slab. We could imagine that was the whole language of A and B, even the whole language of a tribe. The children are brought up to perform these actions, to use these words as they do so, and to react in this way to the words of others. An important part of the training will consist in the teachers pointing to the objects, directing the child's attention to them, and at the same time uttering a word. For instance, the word slab, as he points to that shape. I do not want to call this ostensive definition, because the child cannot as yet ask what the name is. I will call it ostensive teaching of words. I will say that it will form an important part of the training, because it is so with human beings, not because it cannot be imagined otherwise. So I think what he's saying here is that if you have a language that literally consists only of 4 words, slab, pillar, beam, and I think block was the last one, you can't use those to ask, what does this word mean? Because you don't have the word in your language. Like, your language doesn't allow you to ask what the definition of a word is. And so we can't say in the context of this language that pillar is the definition of pillar just means this object over here yet. So far, it's just a matter of the practical association of a word with the thing, by pointing at it and learning and sort of training the children to how to behave in response to a particular word is going to be, in this context, I don't even know that the children are being taught to signify that pillar means this thing, so much as they're being taught, if you hear pillar, this is how you respond. This ostensive teaching of words can be said to establish an association between the word and the thing. So going further now, we can say, beyond just respond in this particular way, now in language we can say, if sort of a slightly more advanced conception of language, we're associating not just behave in this way in reaction to this particular word, but now we're actually learning to signify objects in the world with words. But what does this mean? Well, it may mean various things. But one very likely thinks, first of all, that a picture of the object comes before the child's mind when it hears the word. But now, if this does happen, is it the purpose of the word? Yes, it may be the purpose. I can imagine such a use of words or series of sounds. Uttering a word is like striking a note on the keyboard of the imagination. But in the language of example 2, it is not. I wish I knew what that symbol meant. I'm just going to say it means example 2. It is not the purpose of the words to evoke images. It may, of course, be discovered that this helps to attain the actual purpose. But so now we're getting to, at what point does it become the case that pillar means pillar versus just, respond in this particular way when, the builder says pillar? But if the ostensive teaching has this effect, am I to say that it affects an understanding of the word? Don't you understand the call slab if you act upon it in such a way? Doubtless the ostensive teaching helped to bring this about, but only together with a particular training. With different training, the same ostensive teachings of these words would have effected a quite different understanding. I set the brake up by connecting up rod and lever. Yes, given the whole rest of the mechanism, only in conjunction with that is it a brake lever, and separated from its support it is not even a lever. It may be anything or nothing. In the practice of the use of language, too, one party calls out, and I believe once again we're referring to the pillar slab language, one party calls out the words, the other acts on them. An instruction in the language, the following process will occur. The learner names the objects, that is, he utters the word when the teacher points to the stone, and there will be this still simpler exercise. The pupil repeats the words after the teacher, both of these being processes resembling language. We can also think of the whole process of using words in 2 as one of those games by means of which children learn their native language. I will call these games language games, and will sometimes speak of a primitive language as a language game. And the process of naming the stones and of repeating words after someone might also be called language games. Think of much of the use of words in games like Ring-a-Ring-a-Roses. I shall also call the whole consisting of language and the actions in which it was. I shall also call the whole consisting of language and the actions into which it is woven the language game. Let us now look at an expansion of language too. Besides the 4 words, block, pillar, etc., let it contain a series of words. Use the shopkeeper, an example, and one of our first examples, the Apple one. Use the numerals. It can be the series of letters of the alphabet. Further, let there be 2 words, which may as well be there and this, because this roughly indicates their purpose, that are used in connection with a pointing gesture. And finally, a number of color examples. A gives an order like D, slab, there. At the same time, he shows the assistant a color sample, and when he says there, he points to a place on the building site. From the stock of slabs, B takes one for each letter of the alphabet up to D, so A, B, C, D, so 4 slabs, of the same color as the sample, and he brings them to the place indicated by A. On other occasions, A gives the order this, there. At this, he points to a building stone, and so on. So now we're beefing up our language a little bit and giving it a little bit more flexibility to, for example, say, how many slabs do you want? And we're using the letters to indicate that. So you can imagine sort of building up the language to the next level. When a child learns this language, it has to learn the series of numerals, as it were, in this case A, B, C, by heart, and it has to learn their use. Will this training include ostensive teaching of the words? Well, people will, for example, point to slabs and count A, B, C slabs, something more like the ostensive teaching of the words block, pillar, etc., which would be the ostensive teaching of numerals that teach not to count but to refer to groups of objects that can't be taken in at a glance. Children do learn the use of the first 5 or 6 cardinal numerals in this way. If I remember correctly, I think Wittgenstein actually taught math to school children for a minute. I think he was a school teacher for a little bit, although I think he was kind of a mean school teacher, if I remember correctly. Are there and this also taught ostensively? Imagine how one might perhaps teach their use. One will point to places and things, but in this case the pointing occurs in the use of the words to, and not merely in learning the use. Now, what do the words of this language signify? What is supposed to show what they signify, if not the kind of use they have? And we have already described that. So we are asking for the expression, this word signifies this, to be made part of the description. In other words, the description ought to take the form, the word blank signifies blank. One, of course, can reduce the description of the word slab to the statement that this word signifies this object. This will be done when, for example, it is merely a matter of removing the mistaken idea that the word slab refers to the shape of building stone that we in fact call a block. But the kind of referring this is, that is to say, the use of these words for the rest, is already known. Equally, one can say that the signs A, B, etc. signify numbers. When, for example, this removes the mistaken idea that A, B, C play the part actually played in language by block, slab, pillar. And one can say that C means this number and not that one. When, for example, this serves to explain the letters are not to be used in the order A, B, C, D, etc., and not in the order A, B, D, C. So, from a certain perspective, let me think. This one, I think what he's sort of getting at is that, in a certain sense, you could imagine a language that has A, B, D, C, but in fact that's not the one that we're going after. That's not the language that we have. And in fact, to some degree, words are defined by what they aren't, or by, I mean, it's important to know that slab doesn't mean block. So it's sort of exclusionary in that sense. I think there's something here that I'm missing, some element that he's getting at that I'm not quite picking up on, but maybe as I chew on it a bit more, I'll come to understand it a little bit more. Think of the tools in a toolbox. There is a hammer, pliers, a saw, a screwdriver, a rule, a glue pot, glue, nails, and screws. The functions of words are as diverse as the functions of these objects, and in both cases there are similarities. Of course, what confuses us is the uniform appearance of words when you hear them spoken or meet them in script and print, for their application is not presented to us so clearly, especially when we are doing philosophy. It is like looking into the cabin of a locomotive. We see handles all looking more or less alike, naturally since they are all supposed to be handled. But one is the handle of a crank which can be moved continuously. It regulates the opening of a valve. Another is the handle of a switch, but has only 2 effective positions. It is either off or on. A third is the handle of the brake lever. The harder one pulls on it, the harder it brakes. A fourth, the handle of a pump. It has an effect only so long as it is moved to and fro. When we say every word in a language signifies something, we have so far said nothing whatever, unless we have explained exactly what distinction we wish to make. It may be, of course, that we want to distinguish the words of language 8, which I believe by 8 they mean here the one described in paragraph 8, which is our expanded block and pillar language. From words without meaning, such as occur in Lewis Carroll's poems, or words like lillaburlero in songs. Imagine someone saying, all tools serve to modify something. Thus the hammer modifies the position of the nail, the saw the shape of the board, and so on. And what is modified by the rule, the glue pot, the nails? Our knowledge of a thing's length, the temperature of the glue, and the solidity of the box. Would anything be gained by this assimilation of expressions? The word to signify is perhaps used in the most straightforward way when an object signified is marked with a sign. Suppose that the tool A uses in building bears certain marks. When A shows his assistant such a mark, he brings the tool that has that mark on it. It is in this and more or less similar ways that a name means and is given to a thing. It will often prove useful in philosophy to say to ourselves, naming something is like attaching a label to a thing. What about the color samples that A shows to B? Are they part of the language? Well, it is as you please. They do not belong among the words, yet when I say to someone, pronounce the word the, you will count the second the as part of the sentence. Yet it has a role just like that of the color sample in the language game from paragraph 8, that it is a sample of what the other is meant to say. Okay. It is most natural and causes least confusion to reckon the samples among the instruments of the language. Remark on the reflexive pronoun this sentence. It will be possible to say in language from paragraph 8 we have different kinds of word. For the functions of the word slab and the word block are more alike than those of the word slab and D. But how we group words into kinds will depend on the aim of the classification and on our own inclination. I'm just going to check an OBS. Nice. I always get worried it's going to turn off when I'm not looking at it. Think of the different points of view from which one could classify tools or chessmen. So you could arrange chessmen by size, by color, by the functions they move, by the functions and sort of the movements they're allowed to make, by mass, by all kinds of different functions, by height, weight, etc., etc. Do not be troubled by the fact that languages 2 and 8 consist only of orders. If you want to say that this shows them to be incomplete, ask yourself whether our language is complete. Whether it was so before the symbolism of chemistry and the notation of the infinitesimal calculus were incorporated in it. For these are, so to speak, suburbs of our language. And how many houses or streets does it take before a town begins to be a town? Our language can be seen as an ancient city, a maze of little streets and squares, of old and new houses, and of houses with additions from various periods. And this surrounded by the multitude of new boroughs with straight rectangular houses and straight rectangular streets and uniform houses. It is easy to imagine a language consisting only of orders and reports in battle, or of a language consisting only of questions and expressions for answering yes or no, and innumerable others. And to imagine a language means to imagine a form of life. But what about this? The call slab 1 in example 2. Is the call slab 1 in example 2 a sentence or a word? If a word, surely it has not the same meaning as the like-sounding word of our own ordinary language. For in example 2, it is a call. But if it is a sentence, it is not the elliptical sentence, slab, of our language. I'm not sure what elliptical sentence means. As far as the first question goes, you can call a slab a word and also a sentence. Perhaps it would also be appropriately called a degenerate sentence, as one speaks of degenerate hyperbola. It is in fact our elliptical sentence, but that is surely on a shortened form of the sentence. Bring me a slab, and there is no such sentence in example 2. But why should I not, on the contrary, have called the sentence, bring me a slab, a lengthening of the sentence, slab? Because if you shout slab, you really mean, bring me a slab. But how do you know this? How do you mean that when you say slab? I think this is supposed to be an exclamation mark. I think the reason that looks funny is that's supposed to be an exclamation mark. Bring me a slab. But how do you know this? How do you mean when you say slab? Do you understand? Do you say the unshortened sentence to yourself? And why should I translate the call slab into a different expression in order to say what someone means by it? And if they mean the same thing, why should I not say when he says slab, he means slab? Again, if you mean bring me the slab, why should you not mean slab? But when I say slab, then what I want is that he should bring me a slab. Certainly. But does wanting this consist in thinking in some form or another of a different sentence from the one you utter? So I'm going to need to break that down a little bit more. I think I understand what he's getting at, but I need to chew on it a little bit in my own head in order to phrase it correctly, I think. I'm going to call it there. Wittgenstein is very dense, and I think, honestly, like 20 to 25-minute chunks is probably a good way to approach it. So far we're just examining how language works. We say that words mean things, but what does it mean to mean? And how do we understand what it is for a word to mean what it means? And is that even a good way of thinking about things? Wittgenstein is focusing on a very practical method right now, or a very practical take right now, where we're examining language largely in terms of its effects, what people do in response to a particular word. And we're sort of at the moment building primitive conceptions of language that we're going to build out from here to sort of get a clearer and clearer depiction of language that we use. Which can be very helpful. I can say this for myself. My limited exposure to Wittgenstein has been really enlightening to me. This conception of language where it really helps me to clarify my thoughts, and it's helped me do philosophy. It's actually helped me out in a lot of different ways in life. So I hope you stick around. Thank you so much for reading along with me. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something. If you wouldn't mind giving the channel a subscribe and the video a like, I would really appreciate that. And I will catch you next time. And I'm going to look up what an elliptical sentence means for next time. Thanks.